Trading standards has always been about protecting people. From its very earliest origins with the introduction of hallmarking laws 700 years ago, through to the weights and measures inspectors and food safety laws of the 19th century, the expansion of the profession into consumer protection from the 1970s onwards, and right up to the present-day fight against the scams emerging from the COVID-19 crisis, trading standards has been a crucial component of UK society, promoting values of fairness, trust and public service even during difficult times.
It's a very broadly based service now. It's very much embedded in history. I think we found our roots back to the Magna Carta if you search long enough. So we have a lot of history. The Trading Standards Institute has been around, and the trading standards profession in its present form has been around for the best part of 150 years. So it has quite a lot of pedigree.
The Office of Fair Trading came into existence in 1973. Things like the Consumer Credit Act came into existence. So it was a really exciting time. The Trade Descriptions Act had come in 1968. So we were really moving from an old weights and measures type service into a much broader consumer protection service. And then there was an argument over the name. We became Consumer Protection. That looked too biased because it's always been a service that's as much on the good business side as it is on the consumer side. So hence Trading Standards was born in sort of the mid-70s, late 70s, and that stayed with us.
I really loved it. I thought I was well looked after and training, and I passed very, very well because I had really good people that were proud to be trading standards officers and proud of their profession, proud to serve members of the public and proud to work with the businesses to ensure compliance. And they were proud to be part of Trading Standards Institute.
We are that insurance policy. We're there in the background. You never need to pull on it until you need it. And the fact is that you make that investment, and it's a sound investment because you want to be in a position to know that when things do go wrong and we do have a crisis, you can then pull on that insurance policy. And that's where Trading Standards, I feel, firmly sits. The work that goes on in the background day to day is never seen. And yet fundamentally, for every person in the country, we are supporting their well-being in one way or another by ensuring that there isn't consumer detriment, that the food that they're eating is safe to be on their plate, that there is appropriate levels of regulation across all sectors of their life, from the day they're born to the day that they go into the grave.
And just as Trading Standards is all about protecting people, at its heart are people themselves. Trading Standards officers are among the most dedicated and hard-working public servants in the country, though their work sometimes goes unacknowledged and underappreciated. Trading Standards has been described as the invisible service. That is, it remains unseen until something goes wrong. And things do go wrong. Time and time again, the profession has proven its value to the life of UK citizens at times of crisis. It's never been afraid to speak truth to power, spearheading campaigns that put public protection at the very centre of the national conversation.
People really aren't aware of who we are and what we do occasionally. We all do an awful lot of good work protecting, but it's almost from the sidelines and it's behind the scenes, and people don't realise, probably maybe because of the name Trading Standards, we're a bit different than environmental health, where people quite obviously know what it is that Environmental Health and Food Standards Agency do.
I think for many consumers, they probably don't know trading standards are there, but they go out and buy their food and it's weighed and it's the correct weight, but they never consider that. They buy products without thinking whether they're safe because they just know they are. And I think that's the bit the potential they're going to miss if it's not there. We've seen that to some extent, I think, with the issues about product recalls, where consumers have suddenly spotted that there is a weakness in the chain and in the system that's not dealing with that.
I had to do a project where I had to kind of research, how many people actually know about Trading Standards' work? How many people know what Trading Standards does? And my research, the results that I got was not a lot of people know that their first point of contact for that issue is Trading Standards. There was a massive gap in age as well. So anyone that was above the age of, I would say 40, was very much aware of the work Trading Standards does. But anyone below that age, that was the first time they heard about Trading Standards.
I get the sense, having spoken with trading standards professionals. They don't necessarily want to be in the limelight all the time, but actually what they do want to do is to make sure that the work they're doing is protecting consumers and protecting the public. And I think, therefore, our challenge, as CTSI, is to help raise awareness of what our members are doing, so that they do get that sort of rightful recognition. And I think we need to do that probably with the public, but also within government as well, just because I think it absolutely deserves recognition.
Trading standards ultimately has a responsibility for ensuring fairness, something which is incredibly important to consumers and businesses alike, but which can be taken for granted. The profession really becomes visible at times of crisis or major change. Many such events have happened over the last 50 years, as the consumer brief of the profession has grown and a balance has emerged between educating and safeguarding consumers on the one hand, and supporting and advising businesses on the other.
The service has been involved with quite a lot of major issues over the period that I've been involved. I mean, if I think back to the 1970s, there was the fuel crisis, and we were heavily involved there, both in terms of the propriety of sales, but also in relation to coupons and rationing of fuel. It never came to that, fortunately, but we were involved. The foot and mouth crisis of the 1990s, clearly a very serious issue which devastated the farming industry. In the 2000s, the BSE crisis, which was, of course, a major concern as well, with far-reaching health concerns for the public at large, as well as, of course, the damaging effect it had on the industry. And latterly, of course, Grenfell, where we've seen the concerns about construction products, which is a brief that the Trading Standards Service has, and leading up to the present day, where we have the COVID crisis, which has brought with it all sorts of attendant problems for consumers and indeed for businesses of scamming and price gouging, in other words, ramping up prices and taking an unfair profit. So a whole range of issues which the trading standards community has dealt with in its changing face over the period of time.
I have seen foot and mouth in 2001. I saw swine fever, which would have been 1999-2000. I've seen the petrol strikes back in 2000. We've had foot and mouth 2001. We had foot and mouth 2007. We've had horse meat. We've had Grenfell. Some of those areas I may not have necessarily been frontline involved with, but you do get drawn in with quite a unique set of skills, I would say, that trading standards professionals hold, that we can be pulled into any crisis where it's needed.
Any form of emergency situation always brings out the unfair traders. One of the things that Trading Standards has always been good at, and why they're given these jobs, they are well-trained, effective, efficient regulators, and the government know that despite how many cuts they put in, the Trading Standards regulators will do the job properly.
Our officers as trading standards, they're used to acting efficiently, promptly, and you'll find they work with pace and they deliver with pace. But also at the same time, they're always not thinking about just being punitive, but they're always advising to ensure that there is compliance and that the businesses do understand at the time of the crisis that why they have to comply and how to comply as well.
During the foot and mouth crisis of 2001, trading standards officers were fundamental to protecting the public and enforcing animal welfare, while also supporting the farming industry. Our 2019 film for CTSI Symposium asked if trading standards could cope with a similar crisis today. COVID-19 has made that question more than just hypothetical.
What happened in foot and mouth was it became clear that although government may have liked to have run it all from the centre, the fact was the knowledge, in that case, of farmers and various activities, the good guys and not so good guys, the knowledge was all at local level. And the trading standards professionals all knew their farms, all knew their farmers, all knew their local businesses. And many of those good local businesses were going to trading standards to tell them of perhaps those that weren't fulfilling their responsibilities. So that played a huge part in in getting the country back on its feet. The worry I have now is if we had, for example, another similar foot-and-mouth outbreak, God forbid that we do, but if we had that, then I worry about the depth of resource we would have to respond in that way.
The strength of trading standards is that they adapt. So you can say they'll cope, but the reality is that coping is getting a lot harder. And if I reflect on foot and mouth, we pulled resources from all over the place, stopped almost our day job to focus on that, and it worked well. I know, working back in trading standards, I always said if there was another foot and mouth type outbreak, we wouldn't cope because there just aren't the bodies out there. We would have to get other people involved.
It's important to raise awareness of how, when you have those big emergencies and you have those sort of tragedies occurring, how quickly trading standards are asked to be involved to help solve the problems, to make sure they don't occur again. And I think that's the key point, because I often find that with hindsight that it's possible to look at events and to find out that there were some elements of those events that were avoidable. If we can get people who have the right expertise and experience more involved in these areas where we know there are risks, and it's anticipating where those risks might be in the future, actually what you are potentially able to do is to avoid those risks becoming bigger risks and then actually becoming something that manifests itself into something that's essentially a national issue.
Despite its crucial and central role in dealing with crises, trading standards has faced significant challenges over the past decade, with budgets slashed across the country. And that's meant adapting its approach, moving further away from market surveillance and towards an intelligence-led model.
Kent's operational method now is to collect intelligence, and they act on the worst offenders, if you like. So if they get 2, I think 3 or 4, whatever it is, complaints about a local pub, a car dealer, a manufacturer, whatever, they will then go along and visit and advise and, if necessary, get them to put right what's going wrong. But all the other premises that aren't visited are probably still doing things wrong, but people aren't complaining.
We now very much intelligence-led, and when I entered the profession over 25 years ago, we had routine inspections still based on risk, but there are a number of inspections that officers would carry out throughout the year, and I think this allowed officers to know the communities, engage more with businesses, and not necessarily just being the first point of contact when something goes wrong. So I think that's changed a bit. I think the teams are smaller, so we do have to work intelligence-led. We cannot work in the same way, so we do have to move with the times. But I think there needs to strike a balance with finding time to proactively engage with the wider community.
Trading standards officers have consistently stepped up to the mark and demonstrated their resourcefulness and commitment, even as their roles become ever more demanding and complex.
It's 250 pieces of legislation that potentially we could enforce, and as regulators, so as we've seen with the COVID crisis, we can understand legislation quickly, so we're looked upon as the experts to interpret the legislation and apply it to local businesses and to consumers.
I think one of the things that identifies why the service has got so many responsibilities is my professional colleagues have been extremely effective over that period of time in actually being flexible and responsive to change.
We have to cover so much law. I think we're a profession which is strange in that to tell someone you go from animal health to weights and measures with safety and fair trading and goodness knows what else in between is quite surprising for people.
In many respects, the profession has shifted, certainly to help support businesses and to help businesses that are dealing with the uncertainties of legislation through things like primary authority, and that's particularly important for small and medium-sized enterprises. I think what we see less and less of is perhaps prosecutions. You don't see many prosecutions. Maybe that's rightly the case. Maybe perhaps other means of enforcement are working well. But I think the danger is that if trading standards doesn't keep itself in the public profile, then it won't. In a time where resources are hard to get hold of, it's going to find it increasingly difficult to get hold of those resources.
At all times, the profession underpins the level playing field without which fair trading is impossible. Trading standards work may be invisible when things are running smoothly, but the impact is constant. The numbers speak for themselves. In 2018 to 19 alone, trading standards prevented £42.6 million worth of consumer detriment, recovered £4.9 million from proceeds of crime, and prevented £26.8 million from falling into the hands of criminals. But the value should not only be measured in economic terms. In the same period, it supported more than 11,000 victims of scams, investigated more than 43,000 complaints, and responded to nearly 14,000 requests for advice from businesses. While trading standards has a huge impact, the consumer landscape is only getting more complicated and challenging, and the share of detriment that the service can't reach is likely to continue increasing.
If I reflect on what a consumer did back in the 70s compared to what consumers do now, it's global trading, it's buying complex products, entering into complex deals, instantly online and so on. And that adds another level of complexity for the service as well, in terms of how they work, how they react with businesses, how they find businesses.
I know it's becoming more popular about us, being on social media and in using technology, etc. But I guess I can only speak from my own experience, but there's still a lot of my colleagues who aren't as comfortable with using digital.
While under the cloud of coronavirus, the UK faced the challenge of Brexit, and trading standards continues to be heavily involved in helping businesses and consumers adapt to the impacts of EU exit. CTSI's Brexit think tank has been unravelling the complex regulatory implications of EU withdrawal since the vote to leave in 2016, addressing a vast array of topics, from travel law and animal welfare to fair trading and food standards. But as the COVID-19 pandemic took hold, trading standards once again stepped up to the front line, putting the safety of the public at the centre of its efforts. Throughout the lockdown, at a time of anxiety and grief for many, trading standards professionals have been instrumental in bringing those who sought to exploit the vulnerable to justice, in communicating clear guidance to businesses, and in reassuring and protecting the public.
Since the beginning of the pandemic, I suppose when everything really started to change back in late February, early March time, while we were dealing with working from home, probably none of us envisaged the role that trading standards would have to play, particularly in respect of cancellation and refunds, dealing with price gouging, providing advice to businesses, and providing that overall sense of responsibility to protect consumers at a time where people might not necessarily know where to turn to.
Trading standards were in the shops, making sure that people weren't taken advantage of, people weren't deliberately increasing prices. I think also scams increased, COVID scams, vaccine scams, so many different scams that we have been, working with other local authorities to take them down and maybe sometimes educate them, raise awareness on these types of scams. But it has definitely increased, and I do believe trading standards played a tremendous role in minimizing those businesses from taking advantage of the public, really.
Possibly there's a missed opportunity to use the skills and expertise of officers who used to looking at legislation and know the sort of things that would be useful as powers for us as regulators to have real teeth, especially in the early part of the pandemic when things like maybe fixed penalty notices weren't available, so it made it difficult to have a real effect. I think we take the punches as they come, we roll with it, and I think what has been really positive is our engagement with ops and central government around some of these issues.
The pandemic gave society the collective will to reflect on those workers who are really essential to its functioning. Not just doctors and nurses and police officers, but delivery drivers, supermarket staff and care home workers. Trading standards officers are undoubtedly part of that vital group and have proved indispensable in our response. The public and government have also been pushed to reflect on the importance of preparedness, preventative action and emergency planning. There is always risk, and politicians must be held to account not just for what goes wrong on their watch, but for what could go wrong. Coronavirus has made us all reflect on what it means to be vulnerable.
We're all now vulnerable because of our situations, because of the coronavirus. We're all in a situation where we're having to do things like homeschool, work from home, manage our kids, dogs, exercise, mental health, all of those things in a lockdown situation, which makes us all more likely or susceptible to make an unwise decision.
We know that those that were disadvantaged before the crisis are going to be more disadvantaged as we come out of it. And we also know that there are going to be people who weren't disadvantaged beforehand who are going to be disadvantaged in the future. It's difficult to compare with the emergency services like the fire police and the NHS, and one would never do that. But you can't underestimate the importance of the work of trading standards professionals, because if you link it, for example, to what's been going on through COVID, you've had trading standards professionals who have been making sure that personal protective equipment has been safe, and some of it isn't, and therefore they've been directly involved in supporting essentially what's been going on the front line in the fight against the virus.
Other ramifications could be mixed. Increasing familiarity with technology and the ubiquity of video conferencing is a potential boon to efficiency, but a potential cause of harm for consumers.
I have teleconference meetings, Zoom conferences. I didn't even know things like Zoom existed. And certainly, that ability to be able to have a meeting online with a business who may want to just get advice rather than going through the formalities of setting up a date in a diary, travelling half the length of a country to provide advice and guidance can be done now from our desks. I think things will certainly change in terms of consumers' buying habits. We don't know what consumer landscape and what the retail landscape is going to look like this time next year or the year after.
Sometimes we have these major incidences or major crises that forces us to think differently in terms of how we deliver services. And we've had to think and work faster in terms of drafting procedures and compliance information. And there's actually more talking and doing with businesses and delivering at pace information which can be used to help consumers or to help the business in terms of compliance.
Trading standards are community-based workers. We should be at the heart of the community because we're there to protect the community. If we all become very remote workers, how do we still make sure that we engage?
How the medium-term impact of coronavirus and Brexit will affect consumer protection is not yet clear. Soon the public's heightened awareness may subside. Political appetite for preventative action may wane, and recession may drive funding for public services down again. Meanwhile, the need for trading standards services is likely only to increase, with consumers and businesses left vulnerable for years to come.
I think we are going to potentially see a dramatic increase in loneliness and the effects of that, the physical and mental effects of that, which have a direct effect on people's health and their cognitive ability. So if you're talking about cognitive ability, then you are talking also about consumer purchasing habits as well. And again, those people will be more likely to fall for scams, and the criminals will know that. So we could see a spike in scams.
There is no doubt that the world will look different after COVID. And there are obvious components to that. One is how will trade look? How will the retail trade is obviously going to suffer quite a lot in all of this. We will see a considerable increase in electronic trading, in internet trading, in the global marketplace. We'll see an issue about consumer confidence. How will consumer confidence be affected? But with it, how will consumer problems be addressed in an increasingly global marketplace?
The framework of society and the way people operate will change. And I think some of that will be forever. it will have a huge impact in terms of cost, business costs and the like, but also in our behaviours and how we relate to each other. And you know, we may be embracing technology and have been for the past sort of 20 years at one hell of a rate, but this is going to accelerate it. And the thing with I suppose the rogues and the criminals is that they tend to be a little bit ahead of the game.
In the wash up on all this, when we look at the threats to the future, then it will be really important that the role of those services like trading standards and our colleagues in environmental health and elsewhere, that they are recognised and that something meaningful is put into place. And that's the worry I have, that actually when we move past all this, we just slip back into where we are now, and that just won't be good enough, I'm afraid.
As Trading Standards prepares to rise to the challenge of this changed world, it has an opportunity to work towards proper representation of the consumers and businesses it serves. Along with COVID and Brexit, a major public concern over the last year, prompted in part by the global protests over the murder of George Floyd in July 2020, has been the urgent need to focus on equality and racial justice. An important part of that is ensuring that national institutions are run fairly, transparently, and in the interest of all citizens. Last year, CTSI launched a new working group to address issues of race and equality within the profession.
Last year, during the pandemic in America, we learned about the murder of George Floyd by the American police. Having watched that video, I just could not believe what I was watching. It was totally awful and devastating. I've always been passionate about equality and diversity, and really inclusion is very, very important. But when I watched that video, it was just to another different degree. And I've been having people talking to me to say, what are CTSI doing? As CTSI is professional membership for enforcement officers. We are a lot like the police, whether you like it or not. We do take action against businesses and people who don't comply with the law. And how we act and how we behave can be very similar to the police. So what are we doing to ensure that, obviously, that our actions are proper and just, and also really for us to understand what's really going on within our own profession in delivering our services. And thank goodness it was well embraced and set up the Race and Equalities Working Group, which is now really very well established, and we are moving on at pace. So our priorities are really, first and foremost, I always believe, coming back from my background in science and law, everything must be evidence-based. So our priorities at the moment is about collating data to find out, our workforce itself for trading standards, who we are, what we are, what's the makeup. And when you talk about equalities, we're talking about all aspects of the 9 protected equalities, including race, gender, age, religion, and so forth. At the same time, we're also informing and educating ourselves with regards to equalities itself, legislation, and unconscious biasness, because all of us, whether we like it or not, we have got biases in terms of how we make decisions. So again, it's informing ourselves to become, to make the right decisions, not based on our biases. So we're running a training program, or we're trying to devise a training program and educate everybody at all different levels, from CTSI head office, members of the board, members of the exec, officers on the ground in the LA, in the local authorities, and so forth.
Since George Floyd last year and having these conversations, it's just become more apparent that there's limited diversity in terms of race in like council meetings or at, in those exec meetings where it adds maybe a different view and viewpoint. And I'm seeing that that's starting to change now. I know probably people from the BAME communities who probably wouldn't know to phone trading or contact trading standards if they had an issue. And, that leads to some inequalities. And for those who do know or are in the know, who are able to access our services, and other communities that maybe feel perhaps a level of distrust, not knowing what we do.
I guess the tricky aspects around trading standards and maybe other similar professions is that they've got some very sort of what I would describe as old and antiquated, really, structures, very hierarchical, hard to get into, difficult to navigate, and therefore those things can be barriers for anyone, never mind anyone from a different background.
We could do better because the communities that we're serving are very diverse, be it in London, Birmingham, wherever you are, they're very, very diverse. And I think also when you do have officers from different backgrounds, diverse officers, you bring in those kind of diverse experiences into how we're delivering our services, into how we could work better, engaging those different types of businesses from those backgrounds. I think it's absolutely wonderful. It's just, I think it's such an opportunity for us to work better and differently, and suggest different ways of working and improve our working plans and service delivery. So I think it's something to be embraced.
I think an important role for a professional membership body like CTSI is to look at the ways that we can help individuals develop. And so I'm very keen to look at ways that we can support those sorts of programs, so that we are essentially putting sort of more positive steps in place to encourage everybody, but particularly those from underrepresented groups. And there are so many talented people out there that aren't currently involved or thinking about the profession. Actually, what we need to do is to encourage them in, and then to demonstrate and show, and then actually they become the role models of the future. And then they're the ones that are talking about how exciting and vibrant and dynamic the profession is and what a great place it is to be operating. And I think that over a period of time, and it doesn't happen immediately, it happens over a period of years, but we've got to start that journey, and we've got to start it now.
We are at a crossroads. As we emerge from coronavirus, we must not forget the lessons of another crisis, leaving trading standards to decline further. Instead, we must develop the structural and financial solutions to strengthen it, to make it more diverse, more adaptable, and better suited to the evolving needs of 21st century society. Raising awareness among consumers, businesses, and political decision makers is a key part of that battle.
What do you think needs to be done to get people to recognise the, if you like, sort of constant latent risk level, and to understand why it's so important to have trading standards in place?
I think it's part of the role of CTSI, to be honest. They lead in the profession to make that case and to continue to make it, and fair play, CTSI, we do shout as loud as we possibly can. Obviously, at times like this, it becomes obvious. Governments recognise our role, and local authorities recognise our role and our importance. In fact, I was told once by a local councillor that they don't have to worry about trading standards because nothing, it's a good service. It always works well. It does good things for the public. I never get any complaints about trading standards. So I just leave trading standards alone and they get on with it.
The challenge for the profession is to highlight how important it is that trading standards has that opportunity to be involved at that early stage with that sort of steady state of the right resource to prevent that sort of big emergency occurring. And I think the critical thing there is raising awareness of just how much those big emergencies cost the country, not just in terms of money, but in some instances in terms of lives. And actually, when you start to look at it through that lens, I think it really makes a very powerful case for what trading standards does and what it can prevent. And then when you start to explain it that way, that is therefore an insurance policy that is worth having. And I think our role through CTSI and through working with others and engaging with others is to help make that case as to why the country needs to spend the money on trading standards, because effectively it is that insurance policy, and it's making sure that ultimately consumers are protected and consumers don't suffer harm.
We really do need to make the case for trading standards. The work that we do is invaluable. There's been studies and reports that show the level of harm caused by the likes of mass marketed scams. Frauds and mass marketed scams run into the multiples of billions. I think we're doing it much better, and CTSI has certainly been leading the charge on that. We have seen possibly a sea change and a shift in the mindset as government does recognise the role that trading standards plays. I've certainly seen over the last few years the work that we were doing on doorstep crime, on scams, on IP crime, has been recognised certainly by our enforcement partners who call on us for our guidance, our expertise, our professionalism to assist them in those areas. And certainly a lot of the areas that we've been dealing with now for well over 10 years are getting recognised by politicians and officials in government that these are important issues. These are things that matter to the public.
There's a lot of work that we could do differently. I think we could target particular projects that can really make a difference to businesses and to our consumers. And from that work, publicise the work we're doing and actually explain the consumer detriment to government and also back to the government themselves, explain to them what is the detriment to government and to the society at large if we don't do this work and if we don't really promote and give funding to trading standards.
The case for proper resourcing of trading standards and for its organisation in the future has already been made. The National Audit Office and others have made major reports to government advocating this. Very persuasive cases. The government has this on its agenda. The agenda has been interrupted by recent events, but we're still pressing very hard as a professional institute to make sure that is not forgotten and will be addressed in the future as soon as possible.
It's such a varied profession. It's actually a wonderful profession. And I don't think we do enough to promote that information to young people to make them understand what is the profession all about. It's very varied. A lot of, as we know, experienced officers are leaving the profession. So we need to do this quickly with pace to ensure that we're getting younger people into the profession that can get that experience and knowledge from the elders like myself and start working and delivering and also have that passion, because I'm finding that passion for the profession of consumer protection is kind of dying out. So we need to have those passionate people that really want to make a great, a big difference in their communities.
When I was in primary school, firefighters visited us, other public servants visited us. When I was at university, we got visited from, different professions trying to get us involved, And I think, there's like the smaller youth versions of the police, they have their programs. And I think we would really benefit from just going out into the community a little bit more. I think a lot more people would be, or young people or people from other backgrounds would be willing to even try trading standards if they knew it was there. And if they knew that the profession is one that welcomes them regardless of who they are or what they look like or whatnot. We would really benefit from it. If we keep doing the things that we've always done, nothing will change.
I have to say that the pace of change really needs to be ramped up if we're going to take advantage and remain relevant as a consumer organisation. But I think that's also the opportunity. I think the positive thing is that we're having this conversation. I think the fact that we're having this conversation is clearly a realisation that there's a job to be done. So that's a positive.
So I think the real key will be an appetite for change, appetite for success, appetite for improvement going forward. We've got the wherewithal in terms of the profession, the service, and the capabilities within that, but we need change in an agreed fashion between local and central government, one that's sustainable, one that recognises the strengths of what we have and the needs of the nation and community. So I'd like to see that appetite realised and grasped as we go forward, and just a recognition of the unique capability we have in the UK by way of its trading standards service, something that is not reflected in any other part of the world in the fashion that we have here, one that's envied in every other part of the world. And we should acknowledge and build that at a time when the country and communities need it most.
Trading standards is a floodgate against detriment, harm and crisis, and a first responder when it breaks through. The profession has been protecting the public for centuries. It continues to do so now and will be there as a defender and ally of the public and a champion of honest business for many years to come. For some time, it's been difficult to come together and celebrate that fact. But it's important to recognise and honour all those individuals who make trading standards what it is.
I think we have to be optimistic. It's the last 2 years haven't been great in terms of the world being quite divided on many issues. From a trading standards perspective, I'm always optimistic. I love the work that we do. Many of our staff are so dedicated and committed to helping the public, to doing the best for the public, and to making sure they're as protected as we can be. So I'm without being an eternal optimist, I certainly don't think it's doom and gloom at the minute. A lot of the challenges are quite interesting. Many of us we look to solve the problems. That's just in our nature through law enforcement, and we'll continue to do that. And hopefully things will get better. We'll get back to a more normal way of living and ensuring that we uphold our side of the bargain in terms of protecting consumers.